Welcome to Wide World of News. I'm Mark Halperin. A lot of traditions in America have gone by the wayside in 2020. We've lost so much in sports, in culture, in civic events, state fairs across the country. It's not been a great year for maintaining beloved traditions in the United States. But there is one tradition, one that people could think of as the granddaddy of them all, that is being preserved. To talk about that and how happy it makes all of America, Richard Shea, one of the masterminds behind what I think of as the modern day Nathan's annual hot dog eating contest. Mr. Shea, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, you have figured out a way to maintain the July 4th tradition this year, to have the contest in a slightly different form than usual. Before you explain how it's going to work this year, including the live coverage on ESPN, explain how you were able to deal with New York City in order to pull this off.
It was even bigger than that early on because it was such a shocker, right? What was happening in the world, and certainly in New York in the early days, that you couldn't really even have a discussion, even among my partners and I. It seemed inappropriate to discuss, are we going to do the fourth? It's funny how much we've learned. I remember, so we have a circuit that leads up to the fourth, a number of contests, and when this hit in late March, mid-March, we were trying to think, okay, can we get all of these qualifiers done in the month of June? Like we thought we'd be on the plane in June. We thought we'd be flying around the country. Not the case. So it was that ambiguity that kept hitting all of us, right? I saw it in like two week segments. You'd learn something and then 2 weeks later you'd learn something else. And it was just ambiguity piled on ambiguity with 2 week updates. Things started to get a little better in New York. We had the conversation with our sponsor, Nathan's Famous. They were gung ho to do something and save this, of course, if we could do it safely. Our broadcast partner, ESPN, also was interested in doing this if we could present it safely. When we got those two nuggets about 4 weeks ago, we just kind of hit the ground running. Shared an initial plan with the city of New York, who's not directly involved, but we have to include, and wanted to include, and they're cool with it. So we kept planning, and now we will have an event, and it will be different.
How did you determine who would qualify, given that presumably those events have not been going on, at least in the normal way, earlier in the year?
So it was a little arbitrary, but not entirely. We have returning champions, and there's a little bit of proximity. So there are a couple competitors who happen to be in New York. They're included, and then former champions who could get here. But ideally, we look at the rankings and we see who we can take from the top ranks and get them to New York.
So it's basically, for both the men and the women, it's kind of like a tournament of champions.
Yeah, it is to a degree, and then there's a couple locals. Primarily in the ladies' contest, there are a couple more local eaters who are probably lesser eaters, but they might live within 30 miles of the event. Right. So they're coming, and they're lovely, and we're happy to have them. And their peers in the league, who might be ranked above them, understand that this is just an odd year. But we will have the returning champion Mickey Sudo for the ladies' round, and of course Joey Chestnut for the men's.
Let's talk first behind the camera, not what people are going to see on ESPN and how that will differ, but behind the camera, how will the logistics of this year's competition differ from the norm?
Dramatically. It's a big press event. It's a big earned media event. We're typically running around town with our champs and other and known eaters and popping into like Bill Ritter at ABC7 and Good Day New York and Boomer on FAN and the Today Show and things like that. There will be a lot less of that. There'll be a lot more of this Zoomy type of stuff, right? Fewer eaters. So we have 6 men, 5 women. We had 6 women. One of them had to drop just recently because she's from Arizona, and even though she had just tested negative, we can't satisfy the quarantine in New York. So that's another thing. The biggest thing, I think, is the crowds in Coney Island. So if you've seen this in the news or on ESPN, it's become sort of a bucket list, it's not even sort of. It's a bucket list event for a lot of people. Sure. Like the running of the Bulls or Mardi Gras. We get there in the morning, like the call is like 7 a.m. for a noon broadcast. There are fans gathering that early.
As there could be.
and, from the UK, from all over the world. People drive all across the country. And typically we end up with, we don't do gate, but we believe it's north of 30,000 people on that corner. That's the big deal. We won't be on that corner. It's kind of a heartbreaker, but it is what it is.
And as we discussed before, you're not doing it in front of Nathan's original location on Coney Island. You're doing it in an undisclosed location somewhere in New York. Basically, you haven't told me, and I don't know, but basically it sounds like kind of just a big sound stage, a big open space where there can be plexiglass erected and everybody can be safe and secure.
Yeah, so we have a huge room, and let's say if you have, just do quick math. If we have 6 male eaters, we need a stretch of 36 feet, right? And then we need the judges 6 feet away from them. Fewer judges, fewer eaters, and far fewer members of the media, but still cameras, and ESPN will still go live at noon.
And are they going to be calling this from in the room, or how will that work?
The plan is right now, the last I heard, is the booth will be in the room. We'll probably still have monitors. I haven't seen a final schematic, and I haven't actually been in the room. But I think we ideally will be in the room so we can get a feel of the competition.
So again, in terms of great American signature events, this is really one of the first live events, televised events that the country's going to have, right?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of sports right now. It's so tough to get the sports off the ground, but just an actual live event. And so many cities aren't having their fireworks. Large and small towns have to forego the fireworks. People have to forego their traditional celebrations and big parties and barbecues. So we'll see. I think we'll probably do well with viewers. And yes, we'll be up against fewer events for sure at noon.
But again, even not just sports, all the prominent, annual concert festivals and state fairs. I mean, this is really, you all have found a way to preserve one of the few things that's going to be preserved in at least the first half through the summer, probably events anywhere in the country. I'm wondering whether you think it's because of the logistics of your event are relatively simple. How have you been able to do this when so many other things have just been canceled?
I think willingness of our broadcast and sponsor partners, willingness of our eaters, and willingness of my team and myself to kind of spend a little extra time producing something that we wouldn't typically, the presentation isn't what we typically would want, but we've all leaned into it. I think there's a great willingness. I don't know if I'm answering your question clearly, but it kind of, the reason everyone is kind of on board, every stakeholder, is because of what you said. We are bereft of entertainment. And then, from a Independence Day American perspective, if we can do this, there's sort of rock on. It's an essential American event. Let's do it. So we are psyched about that.
So how long will the broadcast be approximately?
It's always a 1-hour broadcast. We will get both competitions in that broadcast.
So it's normal length, and that's with breaks, obviously, so the sponsors can have their say.
Yeah, it's 44 minutes of TV.
Okay. My last question is this. What's the key to eating a lot of hot dogs in 10 minutes?
I mean, I guess, if you look at Joey Chestnut, he ate 74 Nathan's Famous hot dogs and buns in 10 minutes. That's the world record. I don't think it'll ever be touched. So he's got an inherent ability and a great skill, but I think love of country, love of sport, and love of hot dog.
The 3 New York records that will never be broken are DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak, Joey Chestnut's number of hot dogs eaten in 10 minutes record, and what's the third?
My ability to satisfy the lease I signed on January 29th on 46th and 5th.
46th and 5th, that's prime real estate. Richard Shea, America thanks you. I thank you for making this happen, preserving this event. It's always a signature event on the calendar, but this year it's going to stand out even more than ever, and a grateful nation thanks you.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and I hope it does lend a little levity for everybody.
It will. Eating's a great American tradition. On the 4th of July, nothing beats it. Richard Shea, thank you. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you again soon right here. I'm Mark Halperin. Thanks for watching Wide World of News.